Hello, welcome to another Universities UK Innovation and Growth webcast. This one is about a KPMG report on magnet cities. My name is Greg Wade. I lead on Innovation and Growth for Universities UK, and we have Caroline here to talk about the report from KPMG. Caroline, would you like to introduce yourself?
Indeed, my name is Caroline Haynes. I'm a director at KPMG, where I look at cities and economic growth.
Excellent. Now, we've got the report here, and our members, yes, it's very heavy, and our members have been very interested in it. Could you tell us a bit more about the report?
Absolutely. So this report started about a year ago. So it was when the country was thinking a lot about economic growth and basically how to get things happening in different cities around the UK, sort of before the Northern Powerhouse language came about. And there are essentially two ways that that can happen. Either a government at a national level can put national policies in place, like enterprise zones, or things can happen at the very local level, where individuals, political leaders at the local level can take steps to get their cities revitalised. We tend to do the former and not the latter. So we thought it would be great to go out and get some examples around the world of cities that have gone through acute periods of decline and have managed to reinvent themselves and get their economies booming, but most importantly, make them into really fantastic places to live.
Yeah, and it's that turnaround that is one of the main features of being a magnet city.
Well, a magnet city can be any city, essentially, where GDP is growing at a faster rate than the population is growing. So in other words, the people who live in the place are contributing more and more and more. We have an interesting dichotomy in the UK because in actually all of our cities, except for London and Bristol, the economy as measured by GDP, not GVA, which is what tends to be used in the UK, is shrinking while the populations are increasing. So we have this very interesting, situation happening here. So magnet city, it's much more difficult to become a magnet city if you've been in a period of decline. There are plenty of cities that have always been magnet cities, like the Londons and New Yorks. But with this report, what we are trying to show is that even for cities that have gone through a really difficult period of time, it really is possible to return to that level of growth and happiness and, to become a great place again.
Yeah, so there are lots of positive stories in the report.
There are lots of very positive stories, hopefully some inspirational ones.
What did the report and the research tell you about the role of universities?
Well, so the interesting thing is, when you look at cities over the ages, and I won't go on about that, but cities, once upon a time, they were places that existed on trade routes. They then became places of importance because of what was in the ground. So when you think of the Industrial Revolution and the Sheffields and the Pittsburghs, and now as manufacturing has moved to other parts of the world, cities are essentially places where groups of people come together. And cities that are very powerful and cities that are very interesting are cities that have interesting collections of people, and probably people who come in and out, so there's a nice natural flow. So the interesting thing is then, if you think of what are the assets that attract new people to a place, and universities are probably the most important assets. And we're very fortunate in the UK because we've got some extraordinary institutions, and every city has at least one very strong institution, if not two. So the role of universities, is not, and in the cities that have managed to pull this set of tricks off, the universities have played a really integral role because they understood that they essentially were a form of lighthouse for the city. And so therefore they had an important role to play to make sure that the city was attracting vibrant, young, ambitious people to come to the city, but most importantly, after they had finished their degree or their course of studies, were encouraged to stay there because the quality of life that was offered by the city, by different business opportunities, personal opportunities, were so great that they stayed. And it's very difficult to do it without, a great asset like that. But to a certain extent, I do wonder whether our universities could be doing more with that.
Yeah, and indeed one of the cities actually established a university as part of its
They
its
did,
growth plan.
absolutely, for that reason. So you're absolutely right. In the case of Malmo, which is in the book, they understood that in order to attract essentially more millennials. I mean, this was sort of before the millennial language, I must say. But what they had to do was to actually establish a really, really good higher education institution. And so that's one of the first things they did, the first tenets of their approach, was to do that. And then the university worked very closely with local authorities, equivalents, to basically make the city a place that young people would love to both study and live in. So they pedestrianized huge parts of the city. They introduced bicycles, I mean, all sort of the classic Scandinavian things. They actually focused in that instance very much on green energy because, of course, Scandinavians very, very focused on that as an important facet of their quality of life. So they went after university professors who were specialists in this area and sort of lured them over to Malmo. So on the basis of establishing one institution, it was the first building block to a whole series of moves or additional elements that were built around the university. So it becomes this very powerful force. Which is slightly different what we tend to do sometimes in the UK, where the university institution is quite separate, from the city or the place in which it is based. Another great example is in Pittsburgh, actually, where it was the two universities, University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon University, who actually took the role themselves of redeveloping and redefining Pittsburgh. So that's very interesting because they essentially took the role of the state in that instance and decided that they would become the agitators and that they would transform the city. And they did that in a very interesting way by going back to basically the basics of what the city was about. So Pittsburgh, of course, had been built on the steel industry, very big in engineering, and Carnegie Mellon actually went through and did something incredibly radical, and they closed down a huge number of the faculties that were not directly related to that specific sector. And this was part of their attempt to make Pittsburgh as a city go back to its roots and become highly competitive. So that people knew exactly what the city was about and that it was now sort of an engineering research city again.
Yeah. So there was a radical transformation of the universities matched with a radical transformation of the city itself.
Exactly right. So it forced the city to sort of catch up with their level of ambition. There have also been very interesting models elsewhere where universities have provided the individuals to go out and do some of the design, some of the architecture, so the students actually go and restructure the city. And in other instances, cities have gone and gathered completely different universities. So we're seeing in Asia, for instance, the whole university franchise model, where a city actually builds one large campus and then invites different universities globally to come and put almost a small franchise in the city, again as a means of attracting some of the best and the brightest.
Yeah, I mean those examples are particularly interesting because one of the most fascinating things about the report is the breadth of roles that universities can have in contributing to magnet cities, not just in terms of subjects and students, but also in terms of leadership.
Absolutely.
And community engagement and challenging a city to transform itself. And I think that's why the report was so appealing to a lot of our universities.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because there are also smaller scale things that can be done. So for instance, in the UK, many different universities have small incubation units. So sort of the classic space on campus for students to run startups. And so there I would say also probably more can be done because, is it good enough to offer space? Perhaps what we should be doing is offering a little bit more mentoring to some of those businesses, connecting them with other spin-outs and startups in other cities, as linked to university institutions, do a bit more cross-fertilization of faculties from different parts of the world, so a city that wants to be particularly strong at an industry or sector actually goes and searches out some of the most interesting professors or business, academics to go and pull them into cities for 2-3 years. So I think it's that cross-germination that is very interesting.
Yeah, so there's a lot in the report. There's a lot that universities can do. Caroline, thank you for coming along and telling us about the report.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.